The Chicago Bears only have 4 picks in this year's NFL draft, and Ryan Poles says he's comfortable with that, maybe only drafting 4 players this year. But if they don't make any trades up or down, they need to hit on all of these picks and find 4 players that develop into starters at some point on their rookie contracts.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on X at Cox Sports One. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On the show today, we look at the critical importance of the Bears hitting all 4 of these draft picks with some level of success, needing these players to pan out and develop, even if they're not all 4, day one, year one, rookie year starters, especially the 3rd and 4th round picks this year, need to eventually become more than just career backups so that the Bears can keep the pipeline of talent replenished on this team and keep developing young players on the roster. In particular, I think we'll take a closer look at the idea of maybe finding a future center later in this draft and a future free safety, 2 spots where, as the Bears picks sit right now, the draft doesn't line up super well for the Bears to find them exactly. There's limited options, certainly across the board at free safety, and at center, there are some limited options where the Bears currently pick. But I want to start a little bit more big picture here because, of course, every year you want to hit on all of your draft picks. But we know realistically, no team is going to hit on all of their draft picks, especially, when you're picking, you start out with your generic 7 picks, 1 in each round. You're going to miss sometimes. No GM drafts at 100% accuracy. And most years, if you can leave a draft getting 3 or 4, long-term pieces for your team, that ends up working really well. It's not always your first 4 picks. Sometimes, an earlier pick doesn't work out, but you find a gem in the later rounds. And somehow, one way or another, you end up with 3 or 4 guys from every draft class that you feel like can be building blocks for your franchise. And when you have fewer picks, like the Bears do this year, it adds that much more pressure and importance on getting those picks right, as opposed to when you've got 7 or even 6 picks. You don't have to nail every single pick. You have a little bit more room to maybe, take a chance on a guy that might be a little bit more of a risk, or take a chance on a guy who might be outside of your usual profile, but you've got some wiggle room here to say, all right, we've got some other draft picks. We can go out and get this guy and hope that it becomes something, as opposed to maybe sticking with a player that you feel a little bit better about, or is a little bit less risk, or a little bit maybe, higher floor, lower ceiling, but you still feel like it's worth adding that player to the mix. And so when the Bears only have 4 picks, it's only, 4 of these NFL lottery tickets compared to the, 7 you might normally have. And it heightens the importance of each one individually. And then especially as Ryan Poles wants to continue to build out this Bears team, we talk about, okay, well, the 2nd round pick is basically just Montez Sweat, that they traded him, got Montez Sweat. So that, that kind of helps ease the draft pick burden there. And they used their 5th round pick this year to trade for Ryan Bates, who's expected to be the starting center this season. So it's not like these picks were just wasted or they weren't used to acquire more talented players. But at the same time, you need young players on rookie contracts that develop and grow and get better. That not only are their salary cap numbers a lot cheaper than Montez Sweat and Ryan Bates, but also you control them for a longer period of time. And the rookie players and, players coming in the league tend to be more malleable. More you can do to develop and grow them, as opposed to a veteran player that you trade for might be a little bit more set in what he is or isn't as an NFL player and not going to become something so much greater than what he was earlier in his career. And so the Bears need to be able to keep their cupboard stocked with, especially I think the middle of this draft. Of course, we expect the number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams, to be, he's going to be a day 1, year 1 starter, and we need him to be something spectacular. And we fully expect whoever the Bears take with the 9th overall pick, or if they trade up or down from that spot, that player's going to be a significant contributor in year 1. I don't know if it's a wide receiver and then wide receiver 3. Do you count them as a starter? Like, to me, it's not that I need these guys to be by definition starters, but I need all these draft picks to become players who play significant roles on your team and are not just career-long backups. You know, I think of players in Bears drafts past that, sure, they weren't, were they bad picks? Not necessarily, but they didn't end up, there's a difference between there's a middle ground between total bust and a wasted draft pick and a great pick. Someone can be in the middle. I think of like a Larry Borum in the 5th round. He seems to be a fine backup offensive tackle, and for a 5th round pick, that's normally about what you would expect. Or I think of like Deion Bush as a backup safety. He's a fine backup safety in the NFL, and like that's not a bad career. It doesn't make him a bust. But like the Bears need these 4 picks to elevate to a level above that and be players that not necessarily all in year 1, but over the course of their rookie contracts develop into significant contributors to this Bears team. And I think Ryan Poles is in a great position right now with this roster that at almost any position on this team, you could justify using a 3rd or 4th round pick on a developmental player. I think the only 2 spots when you look at this Bears team right now where I can't find a good justification to use your 3rd or 4th round pick would be at quarterback, because obviously, you're drafting Caleb Williams 1. You've got Tyson Bagent. There's no reasonable explanation to use another draft pick on another rookie quarterback. And then I think the other one is cornerback, where, maybe later than a 4th round pick, if you acquired a 5th or a 6th, like sure, I guess. But when you got Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon, Terrell Smith, and then you even like some of your other younger guys like Jalen Jones, like there's just not really a path towards another young cornerback really contributing significantly anytime in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. So but outside of those positions, I could draft a guard in the 4th round and he could take over as a starter as soon as next year if you move on from Nate Davis or if you let Tevin Jenkins go. I could draft a tight end in the 4th round because Gerald Everett is essentially on a 1-year deal with a team option for a 2nd year. It's a 2-year contract, but you're guaranteed 1 year, and the other year you could get rid of him if you wanted to. So as soon as 2025, a rookie tight end that you draft this year could become a potentially significant contributor in your offense. Of course, wide receiver, defensive line, center, even offensive tackle, like those guys can compete to start and play into bigger roles. And then I'd even throw linebacker. I don't think the Bears should draft a linebacker in the 4th round this year, but it's a position where you can at least find your way to playing time somewhere in the near future. We don't know how much longer Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards are going to be on this Bears team. The Bears built those contracts, so after this year, the Bears could get rid of either one of them more or less whenever they want, if they so wanted to. They're both under contract for longer than that, but the Bears have the flexibility that if one of those linebackers struggles and, for whatever reason, doesn't look like the long-term fit on this defense after this year, which I don't think is going to happen, but there's a path there. So if you draft a linebacker in the 4th round this year, you could, if that player ends up being great, you could find a way for them to get into the starting lineup if you wanted to. Every position on this team, except for special teams, we'll include punter and kicker. I guess I don't want to overlook that. Not drafting a punter or a kicker in the 4th round, please. And then QB and CB. Everything else, I'm fine with using the 3rd or 4th round pick at pretty much any of those positions. If you really believe, if you're Ryan Poles and you really believe that player can and will develop into a significant contributor for your team, because above all else, that's what the Bears need. Ideally, you target those picks as future contributors at positions where you have more of a gulf of future contributors. So I want to go through what we might see in those rounds and later from the center class, as well as the free safeties, because those are the 2 key spots for me. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball season is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Win or lose, after your first bet, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets added into your account, where you can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs and slam dunks. The NFL Draft has plenty of prop bets you can bet on as well, all in the FanDuel app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Get your $150 in bonus bets by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Ideally, the Chicago Bears could come out of this draft with a number 3 wide receiver, a starting edge rusher, and a long-term center of the future, and a long-term free safety of the future, and maybe ideally, some more depth at defensive tackle and at offensive line. But with only 4 draft picks, you can't hit all of those spots. And as I've been going through this pre-draft process and working our way through the prospect lists and mock drafts and some of the tape of these guys, and also the mock draft simulators as well, to kind of get a sense of how this draft class plays out. And even you just look at the mock draft consensus boards, where they take all the draft analysts' big boards and put them together, and they take all the mock drafts and kind of get data on, okay, where are these players across the board being mocked. A couple of themes come across for me at 2 of the key positions I want to talk about with the Bears here: center and free safety. I want to start with center, though, in particular, because it's an interesting center class, where at the top, you've got Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon and Zach Frazier from West Virginia, although Frazier is coming off of an injury that has made his draft evaluation a little bit more complicated. We've been hearing in the last couple of weeks from the draft world, the sort of the NFL draft media, that the league is expecting both of those centers, the whole center class, to go a little bit lower than we think, right? We've talked about Jackson Powers Johnson and maybe even Frazier as potential first-round picks. Some people see Jackson Powers Johnson as much as top 20, maybe even. But guys I think it's Field Yates and Mel Kiper and some others have said, think more second round for those top centers in this draft class. The Bears obviously don't have a second-round pick. Their next pick after the 9th overall pick is at 75 in the 3rd round, and then their 4th-round pick is 122. And in this center class, there's not really a middle class, right? If Zach Frazier and Jackson Powers Johnson, and we can throw Graham Barton from Duke, he played tackle for them, but he's kind of projecting inside at center, much like a Cody Whitehair did a number of years. It's almost been 10 years since he was drafted. That's crazy. 2016, I think. So those 3 guys are kind of the top of the center class, but the middle class of the center class is almost non-existent, and then there's a bunch of later round guys. But when we talk about the 75th pick and the 122nd pick, there's really only 2 names that are projected around that range. It's Cedric Van Pran from Georgia, who we talked about earlier in the week as a potential option there on the Monday Build Your Own Bears mock draft podcast. And then there's Bo Limmer from Arkansas, who's projected more around the 4th round range. Neither one of those guys is particularly strong as a scheme fit for the Bears. They're a little bit more, strong, road grader, north-south type of centers, as opposed to Ryan Poles has clearly had a preference for lighter, more agile centers that can help move laterally for those, stretch outside zone running games. The Bears have wanted a lighter offensive line with good quickness, and that really doesn't describe Cedric Van Pran or Bo Limmer. Now, the Bears could draft them, slim them down, et cetera, and try and make it work that way. I don't think either one of those guys is, off the draft board for the Bears, but neither one is ideal. And then there seems to be a pretty big gulf after them. Those are the main guys in the 3rd or 4th round. It's just kind of 2 guys after the couple guys at the top that probably won't make it that far down. And then you get more 5th, 6th, 7th round guys that it feels like it would be too early for the Bears to reach for one of these other centers just for the sake of taking a center, even if there might be good players there. But someone like Drake Nugent from Michigan, or I think the best scheme fit for the Bears, or the best fit on the later centers that fits what Ryan Poles likes, is Hunter Norzad from Penn State. I think he's been flying under the radar and may end up going closer to the 4th or even 3rd round than he's been currently projected. So maybe he ends up being a better fit draft-wise for the Bears there. But I think in terms of mobile athletic center who can block really well, I think Norzad is a great later round center option. But then there's guys like, Tanner Bordellini from Wisconsin, who I think should play guard in the NFL, but did play a lot of center. And he just has snapping issues. He's a good blocker. He just has never been a consistent snapper throughout college. I don't want to draft a center who's not a consistent snapper. Just play him at guard and let him block, and I think he'd be a fine player there. And I'll throw in one sleeper at center that I don't think is getting a lot of attention. Matt Lee from Miami, I think, is a name to keep an eye on, who may end up going, 6th, 7th round, maybe even undrafted. I don't know a lot about his draft stock, but he's a guy who I think is quietly an underrated center in this draft. But like all these guys are below where the Bears are. They're projected to go later than the Bears have with the 144th or the 122nd pick in the 4th round. So if at some point the Bears trade down and acquire later 4th round pick or 5th or 6th round pick, like that could be a better range for a Hunter Norzad or maybe even a Matt Lee here. But like it's not a center class that aligns well with where the Bears are picking. It's not a weak class. It's not about that. There are 3 guys at the top that are really solid. I think the guys we talked about in the middle are good. There's just not very many of them. And there's a bunch of later guys that there's a lot to like there. They're just, the center position doesn't have as much value, especially if guys don't have as much positional versatility. Like they're going to go later than you might think, but you might be able to get a higher quality guy in the 5th round than you might expect from a regular 5th round center. So it's like, I find myself feeling like the Bears could find their long-term center of the future in this draft class, but just not exactly where they're picking right now. And so if Ryan Poles stays at all 4 picks, which he's expressed a willingness to do, we'll see if I don't think he will, but he said, yeah, we're comfortable with that as a possibility here. Then there just might not be a time where the center they like lines up with being good value with where their draft pick is, even with other centers in this draft. Now, I don't think it's the end of the world if the Bears get through this draft without taking a center. Like you could sign, first of all, you've got both Ryan Bates and Coleman Shelton. So you've got a couple center options already on the roster. You don't need a backup right now. You do have Doug Kramer, drafted a couple years ago in the 6th round. He's, I guess, kind of developing as a center there. And there's certainly a possibility that, after one season, you could bring Coleman Shelton back or you could bring Ryan Bates back. Like you don't have to have a rookie center drafted this year to take over at center. It would just be ideal to kind of have someone who's maybe a little bit higher pedigree than Doug Kramer. Like Kramer's just been a practice squad guy. I'm still waiting for that. Like, I haven't given up on Doug Kramer, but I'm not counting on Doug Kramer to be my long-term option. He hasn't been able to really consistently even make the 53 as a backup. So that to me signals he's not up to that point yet. So it'd be nice to have a guy who's like, a 3rd or 4th round pick who you draft. You don't have to start him as a rookie. He can get a year on the bench. Maybe if there's an injury, he can come in. And then, next year he's ready to go. But it doesn't line up perfectly with this draft class, and I'm not sure that it's going to happen, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. I think it's a similar situation for the Bears at free safety, where you've got a veteran in Kevin Byard. Do you have to have his heir apparent drafted this year? No, but it sure would be nice. But much like the center class in the draft, the players that fit what the Bears might be looking for at the free safety position don't perfectly align with where the Bears are drafting. And it's not a particularly deep class when it comes to like the free safety role. More of this draft class is concentrated at strong safety. So we'll take a look at how the safety class aligns with where the Bears are picking next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and performance, and patience. The winning formula for championship teams is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. We're talking superchargers, exhaust kits, roof racks, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. This year's safety class in the NFL draft is not deep, in my opinion, at the free safety position. There are actually a lot of safeties to like in this draft class, but it's a much better year for, your down in the box / slot cornerback, closer to the line of scrimmage type safety. And it's not as deep when it comes to guys that you want patrolling the back end of your defense in deep coverage downfield consistently. Like, sure, any of the guys in this draft that are more of a strong safety role, like you do ask those players to play deep safety coverages sometimes, much like you do with Jaquan Brisker. But more of the safeties in this draft are built more like a Jaquan Brisker in that kind of a mold than in the, Eddie Jackson rangy guy on the back end. Now, that doesn't mean the Bears will only draft a safety if he's a rangy guy on the back end, but, we've talked about some of the Bears' critical factors at safety, and the Bears value the ability to diagnose plays and to have range, which is not the same as speed per se, but speed is a part of that factor, but not the only factor. Like, the Bears do want players who can cover big areas of the field and not just be an undersized linebacker playing safety or a slot cornerback type. And there's a lot of those guys in this draft, and not as many of the rangy back end free safety like groups. Like, of course, at the top, there's somebody like Tyler Nubin from Minnesota, who I guess potentially could sneak into the first round of this draft. He can be kind of mock draft anywhere from, late first to early second round range. He is a really versatile safety who can do a little bit of everything, but I think being able to use him on the back end is going to be where you're getting the most value out of him. But even once you get like beyond him, like the rest of the top of the safety class, like guys like, Javon Bullard from Georgia or Jaden Hicks from Washington State, not exactly the rangiest of rangy free safety. Like, they have some versatility, but like guys that are a little bit better in the box, strong safety, underneath zone coverage, maybe in the slot. There's a few different guys that are like really good college slot cornerbacks that kind of play safety in their defense, but it's a little bit of a projection then to making them a true back-end free safety. Like, when you start to align it with where the Bears are picking, 75 in the third round and 122 in the fourth round, there's guys like Cameron Kinchens from Miami, Kalen Bullock from USC, and Dadrian Taylor-Demerson from Texas Tech are all kind of in that third to fourth round range there. Where if you got any of those three guys, I think they'd be good fits. They all miss maybe a little bit too many tackles that you like, but ball skills, ability to go make plays at the catch point stuff. Like, we talked about them a little bit on the podcast this week as well. Like, sure, I'd be happy with any of them, but then that's kind of it in the Bears draft range. Like, it's similar to the centers, right? There's a couple of that middle class of, like, not the top guys, but then when the Bears are picking in the middle of the draft, there's 2 or 3 guys that might be a decent option for the Bears. But if those 2 or 3 guys are not your flavor, or if those 2 or 3 guys are off the board, or you're just not, if you're just not as high on those 2 or 3 guys, there's not much else until you get, again, like later in the draft. Someone like Jalen Simpson from Auburn is someone who's got some real similarities to Eddie Jackson. I know friend of the show, Robert Schmitz, Robert K. Schmitz, he does a YouTube channel and a podcast for stuff over. He's now the editor-in-chief of the Bears blog and some other play, and used to write for Windy City Gridiron and stuff. Like, he loves Jalen Simpson. He's been on the Jalen Simpson train for a long time, and I absolutely agree and see him as a guy who's, a little bit light, but I think he can be a pretty good outside, deep safety for you on the back end of this defense. But he's more of a, 5th, 6th round projection range guy, and there's a few other players like later in this draft that might end up being able to develop into a starting free safety down the line. But the Bears' 4th round pick at 122, which is their latest pick in the draft right now, feels too early to take any of those players. So again, if you traded down from any of your picks and acquired later picks, someone like Jalen Simpson, or I'll throw out another little bit more of a sleeper name that I don't think is getting as much attention, even though he had a really good year this past year, but Josh Proctor from Ohio State, I think could be a great developmental deep safety prospect to kind of keep behind Kevin Byard for this year. And don't ask him to start, but like, I want a safety who I trust more than Elijah Hicks. Like, Hicks is kind of like the Doug Kramer for me, where it's like, Hicks has had to start and he's made the team, but when Hicks has been out there, I don't look at him as like, wow, Elijah Hicks is my safety of the future. He seems like he could be a special teams player and maybe an okay backup for a while, but not a guy that I think is currently on the path towards progressing to be a starter. So if I could draft maybe a Josh Proctor or Jalen Simpson from Auburn, or earlier a Cameron Kinchens or Dadrian Taylor-Demerson or Kalen Bullock, like, and have them sit for a year and then be ready to take over for Kevin Byard potentially as soon as next season, that would be ideal. But like we said at the top, like it would also be ideal to draft a wide receiver and to draft an edge rusher and to draft a center and to maybe draft a defensive tackle. Right? And there's only 4 picks, and one of those picks is a QB. So you have 3 picks to address wide receiver, edge rusher, safety, center, and, anything else you might want to draft. And that's already, I named 4 positions. You only have 3 picks to address those 4 positions plus anything else you might want to be able to address. So there's just not a way that, without making trades, which they very well could, there's not a way currently to address all of these spots at the same time. And that's where, again, to me, it's less important specifically what positions Ryan Poles takes with these 3rd and 4th round picks, but get guys who can become significant contributors for you. I want to come away from this draft with 4 future significant contributors. In 2026, I want 4 players from this year's draft that are playing significant roles on the Chicago Bears. That doesn't mean 4 Pro Bowlers. That doesn't mean 4 future Hall of Famers or 4, it doesn't even have to be 4 true starters, but 4 players who are contributing. And you know what? If you trade down from the 9th overall pick and add a couple more draft picks, so maybe you end up with 5 picks in this draft or 6, I still just want 4 long-term contributors. You know what I mean? So adding more picks, obviously you'd love to have 6. You'd love to have all your picks become long-term contributors, but I want to hit that 4 a draft benchmark every year to make sure you keep filling in the back end of this roster with young, cheap talent that gets better over time. So whether the Bears start and finish with 4 picks or start with 4 and finish with 6 picks, I want to leave this draft with at least 4 long-term significant contributors on this roster. There's the clearest path to contributions are at free safety and center in particular. So that would be ideal to be able to acquire those spots. But of course, wide receiver and edge rusher are kind of the bigger priorities over the bigger picture in the draft. And the center and free safety classes don't perfectly line up with where the Bears pick. So I think it incentivizes maybe moving down or moving around a little bit if you want to try and get your picks to align with the value in the draft at the positions that maybe you would ideally like to address. I don't think Ryan Poles is going to go crazy trading down. I don't think Ryan Poles has a lot of interest in acquiring 6th and 7th round draft picks this year. This draft, 2024, is not considered deep in totality. Some positions are deep, some positions are not, but across the board, there's a feeling like the difference between an undrafted free agent this year and a 6th round pick this year is not very big. That there's just not that many great players. There's how many picks are there in the whole draft? 260 something. I don't actually know the total number of players in the draft. I think it's 200 or 220 something. Anyway, I guess the 3rd round starts at 221. The 7th round starts at 221. So it's 250 some odd picks, 256, I think. The difference between, say, the 175th pick and the 250th pick is not that big. That's the feeling around the draft among the NFL teams. So that you don't feel if there's a guy you like in the later rounds, you could get a player as an undrafted free agent that's going to be similar to what you could get in the 6th or 7th round. There's less of a value in having those picks. So Poles might want to acquire a 2nd round pick by trading down or a 3rd round pick. There's still a lot of value in the first 4 or 5 rounds in the draft. That's where you really want to have all your picks. But the 6th and 7th round picks this year are expected to be less valuable to every team, including the Bears, I think. So I don't think Ryan Poles is sitting here saying, let me move down 1 spot in the 3rd round and get a 6th round pick. I don't think he's going to be motivated to do so. He could move down in the 1st round and get early picks, but I don't think he's going to feel super motivated to trade down in the 4th round to acquire a 7th and a 6th round pick because those picks just aren't as valuable this year. So that's something to keep an eye on when it comes to what Ryan Poles does moving around in this draft. Certainly, we'll keep close tabs on any movement on and before draft day, and we're going to keep getting to know some of the draft prospects in this year's draft in the lead up for what we're just a couple of weeks away now. It's exciting. I love the draft every season, and I hope that you'll keep following along with Locked On Bears throughout the whole process, even as I kind of slowly lose my voice over the course of the podcast today. I hope that you will hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to Locked On Bears. That way you can keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Keep coming back to Locked On Bears and making us your first listen. And in exchange, I promise to always make time for you to bear down.